Hello and welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. So let's continue from my C# basics video. So previously, if I look here on my channel, I have gone ahead and told you video number 6, where I talked about basic operations that you can do with numbers. Now here, as always, go ahead, follow me on GitHub and, visit my website. If you have any email, questions, just go ahead and email me and all that. So today it's going to be calling methods. Okay, now ultimately, when we talk about programming, everything boils down to, individual modules, I call them, or methods or functions and so on. So eventually we'll reach a point where we'll have to write a lot of functions. For example, let me just go ahead and open one of my projects here. So let's say I go to my GitHub here. Let's go to GitHub. Here we go. And let's go to one of my projects, demo projects. So I have a new one here called Comic Book Shop. Now, if I go here, you'll see that this project, it's like a full stack project. So you may want to check it out as well while you're learning the basics. So if I go to, let's say I go to message bus, it's a class library, and there's an interface here. You can see here, that's a method, right? And that's a method declaration, we can call it. And then we can go to the implementation, and you'll see here, it's a class, and then we go ahead and implement the method, and then we call other methods, get the response value, call some other method, get the response value, call some other method, get the response value, again wait for something to happen, and then dispose of the client, and so on. So as you can see, everything we do is really about calling methods, right? I mean, of course you have to write methods as well, but a lot of times you're working, like in this file, like look at this here, almost everything is some library. I'm calling something called service bus client. I'm calling something called client method here, another one called JSON convert, another one called service bus message, and another one called GUID. So I am not really writing these methods. I am simply using methods that are already available in the libraries. I mean, in Visual Studio, in .NET, we install these NuGet packages, which gives us most of the functionality we need. So ultimately, a job of a developer is really about using the tools that are given to you and then get your work done. Okay, so that's what really is about method calling. So anything you do, ultimately you're calling methods all the time. So that's what this chapter is about. We'll go ahead and try to call some built-in methods. And again, this is very simple. This is all basics, right? So we are going to touch upon, two very common, function that you might use depending on your scenario. So one is the random class and random method. Another one is the math class. So we'll try out a couple of methods available in these classes, right? So let's go ahead and fire up Visual Studio as always. Let's see. Okay, oh, it's on my second monitor, sorry. I was like, what happened to it? Okay, console app, there it is. Click next. As always, I'm going to create a to delete folder in my desktop. September 172024. Okay, let's go inside, and here I'm going to call this one built-in methods 1, in case I have to create it again. So I always like to put a 1 in the title, because a lot of times you're building projects and sometimes you're experimenting, when you're learning something, right? Like for example, right now I'm working on a client project where we are working with Azure Blob Storage. Now I am familiar with Azure, but I've never gone deep into the blob storage. So I'm reading up a lot of documentation, reading tutorials, blog articles, and videos and stuff like that. And there, what happens, you building something, you're experimenting, and you make too many changes, and sometimes it is easy for you to just take all the learning you did. The more mistakes you make, the more you're learning. So take all that learning and go back and just start over. So when you do that, you want to keep your old code, because all your mistakes are there. You don't want to forget your mistakes. You want to remember them so that you don't have to repeat those mistakes. And a lot of stuff there is still useful. So you can salvage a lot of things from a project that didn't work. So what I do is, whenever I create a project, I always give like a title, like a suffix, 1 or A or B or something, so that way I can track the project as it goes, and I still have access to the previous projects which may have failed for any number of reasons. So it's almost like documentation for me. So there you go. That is why whenever I create a project name, let's say I call it call built-in methods, I'll add a 1 or A or something like that, like a suffix, so that if I have to go back to it with a new project, it works. So just one of those developer tip things. So there we go. Now let's keep going. Now we want to try out some functions which are built in. Okay. So let me get Visual Studio onto the main. For some reason today all the windows are going on my second monitor. I don't know why. Okay, so I want to use the random method to create a random number. So let me just check my notes here. I always forget how to use this. So nothing wrong in checking. There you go, random. And I also don't know where this AI is coming from. I think it is some free AI that Microsoft is just giving away on Visual Studio, I guess. It's not there on VS Code. All right. So there you go. I got the random object. Now all I'm trying to do is I'm trying to go ahead and create a number. So here I think what we have to do is var random number 1 is equal to random.next. So this is what we're talking about, you know. So I have this object, right, called a class called random. It's a very popular function which gives you random numbers. Very useful when you're working with things like secret keys or randomly creating file names, or wherever you want to do some encryption and stuff like that. You do use this a lot and it is pretty good. So now there you go. And then I have the object, and then I use the next function, and I should go ahead and get myself a random number, and I can see here it's an integer number as well. So let's go ahead and display what that number is. So I'm going to say console, as always, console.writeLine, and I am going to say random number 1. I thought I'll do some sentences, you know, build some strings. It's okay, you don't need that. It's pretty straightforward. So let's keep going. Let's go ahead and keep doing this. So I'm going to say, let me just copy paste this a few times. So each time, ideally, we should get a different random number because it is random. So even though I'm copy pasting the same code, each time I should get a different number. So let's give it a try here, and there it is. Each time we get a different number. So that is one way where you call a function. Now this is where I've seen some people, they get a little confused. All right, so let me try to draw something. I don't know why. I know I teach a lot of beginner programmers, and for some reason function calling, it seems to bother some people. I don't know why. It is very unusual. So let's think of it this way. Now try to understand, whenever you're writing a code in the developer console, you are really in the main function. So remember, main is where your program execution starts. Right now, remember, your code, anything you write, it always has a flow to it. There's a beginning, there's an end, there'll be loops, there'll be misdirections, there'll be directions and stuff like that based on values. But ultimately, there's always a flow in your code. As a developer, you're really just channeling the flow of your software based on user actions and data responses from the database or API and so on, right? So remember, you're always coming from the main function. And then from here, okay, so you are essentially calling, okay, you're calling the random method inside the random class. Now again, this is also, for some reason, it does confuse some folks. Like you have random and this one. So on the right side, you have the class, and on the left side is the object, which is an instance of the class. So this is the syntax. Some people are always like, why should it be like this? You know, I don't have an answer to that question, because, you know, this is syntax. Okay, it's like, why is something like this? I don't know. You know, like for example, the Visual Studio logo. Why is that purple? I do not know. It is purple. That's it. That's the end of the story. There might be some history to it, some reasoning behind it, but again, I don't know. It's the syntax. This is how the syntax was created. So just go with it, right? So anyway, coming back. So there we go. So you have the main function. So the flow is happening here. So the flow, program flow starts, and then you call the random method. It goes here, and then this random number does something, because this is not a method I wrote. This is a method given to me from the class. So I don't know how it works. So it creates a random number, let's say 8. And then the flow comes back to this stage. And here the number 8 appears as a return value. So another concept which really bothers a lot of people. It is very simple, guys. You start your execution in the main function. Then you're calling the random method inside the random class. Well, the method name is actually next. So you're calling next. inside from the random object, and that next is giving you 8, random number, and that 8 is coming back to wherever you called. So that is really all that happens. You call and then you get a response. That's it. That's all there is to it when it comes to method calling. So here, if you look at the output, I have called the next method 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. So I'm getting 7 responses. That's the flow. So essentially what is happening is I am calling. Let me just draw this one more time. Let me just erase all this. So what I'm doing is I'm coming to this. I have the random object, and that random object has a method called next. So I'm using this to call next, and I'm calling this some 7 times, and each time I call it, the flow is coming back because I'm calling the same function, but I'm not using a loop or anything. I'm just calling it. So which means the drawing would be something like this. So I get the number, and then I move on. I'm again using the random object, and I'm calling the next method, and I get another number. Okay, so let's say I got, you know what, this might actually, let me just do that. Instead of doing like a loop thing, let's do one thing. So I call the next method, it gives me a random number. Then again, I call the next method, it gives me a random number. Again, I call the next method, it gives me a random number. And I keep doing this 7 times. I keep doing this as long as I want. So that's the flow. And each time I call, I am getting a return value. So whatever value comes back from the method is a return value. There it is, there it is, there it is, like this. Some methods don't give any return value. There are situations where there's no need for it. There are some methods which take values, they accept parameters and then give a value. So we'll worry about that later. But today, the main thing is calling functions and getting a value out of it. So when you get a value, if you want to, you can catch the value. For example, here you'll see that I am catching the return value. So I'm catching the return value, and you'll notice that I'm reusing the same variable. So there's no rule that you have to create a new variable. If you want to, you can go here and you can say var, and you can call this number 2 and then use that in your output. That's totally fine. But however, for my purposes in this scenario, that doesn't seem to be necessary. I can simply reuse the variable that was already created, saving me some time and also memory and typing time, right? So there you go. That's how you go ahead and call the function. Now in the PowerPoint, I did mention, and in my example code, I did mention I'll use the math function. So let's give it a try. So let's say I want to say, I have var number 1 is equal to 10, and then I have var number 2 is equal to 20. And now I think I'm trying to, let me just look at my notes here. I'm trying to find the maximum value. So I'm going to say var larger value is equal to math.max. Again, the AI is trying to help me. I'll take its help. Let me do one more. Var smaller value is equal to math.min. So here I can go ahead and say, let me write a sentence this time. I think it makes sense. So the smaller value, smaller of the 2 is, let's do the same thing here, and I want to say the bigger of the 2 because we have maximum and minimum. So let's go ahead and try that here and here. Let's run it, and there you go. So we had 2 numbers, which is 10 and 20. And we have the smaller number is obviously 10, and then the bigger number is 20. So here what is happening, I am calling the math function, and as I mentioned, we can pass arguments, we can pass parameters to the function, and the function will use those values to get as a response. So here I'm passing 10 and 20, and I'm getting 20 for the larger value, and I'm passing the same 10 and 20, and I'm getting the smaller value here. So there you go, folks. That is really all there is to it when it comes to calling methods, especially built-in methods. And as I showed you in my big project as well, I have this project here called Comic Book Shop, which is like a full stack app. I will put the link in the description if you want to check. I made some videos about this as well on the channel. You can check check that also. So again, any file you go, I'll just randomly open some file. Let me just go here. It's a pretty big project. So there you go. Again, anything you go, you're always calling one or the other method. A lot of time these methods are not even methods that you wrote. These are all built-in methods given to you from libraries or NuGet packages and stuff like that. And this should give you an idea about what we do as developers. Like ultimately a lot of times coding is really about using all these tools, figuring out which method does what does it return, how to convert from here to there, how to get the information, how to catch the error, what kind of message you have to give when the error comes, how do you handle when something breaks down and stuff like that. So really a lot of times, 90% of the time, I would say you're essentially calling methods that are already there and figuring out what to do with it. So you'll see more of it as we go. I mean, we're still in basics here, but eventually I do plan to put complex videos, like especially this project is pretty complex, and I want to do a lot of videos on how to build this project, individual things, individual lines. I want to go deep, so I do have some plans. So anyway, that's all there is to it today, and I'll see you in the next